Everyone, thank you for coming back. Hopefully everyone who's out in the hall getting caffeinated will bring their caffeine back on in here because the program only gets better from the opening plenary. Not that I'm saying anything bad about our opening plenary. All of the speakers were fantastic. So we've broken the program up into a series of 5 plenary that culminate in a holistic plenary at the end. So we're going to go through a conversation about municipal adaptation, then on to natural resources, business, community, and then finally holistic. So we're starting at the foundation of where all government is local, all adaptation is local, with the municipal plenary. And it is my great honor to have my colleague and friend, Denise Fairchild, emceeing, moderating, facilitating, working the magic of the municipal plenary. So without further ado, because all these folks have a lot of important lessons to share, I pass the baton.
Thank you. Good morning. And we're going to do that again. Good morning. Great. So we're going to have, welcome to Denise's Den. My name is Denise Fairchild, and I'm the president and CEO of a national nonprofit organization called Emerald Cities Collaborative. We're a coalition of labor, business, community, and government working across the country and working at the nexus of environment, economy, and equity. And I'm very, very pleased to be here to have a conversation with some of the leaders, municipal leaders across the United States that's working on the issue of climate change. And as Laura said, climate change is global, but the impacts are local. And adaptation and resilience is local. And notwithstanding whatever happens at the federal level, it is the local leadership that's going to drive results. And so it's appropriate that we really do start our conversation today with our municipal leaders. I wanted to first find out how many other city government, state government, local government officials, or even federal government officials are here. Would you stand up? Can we see who our government participants are? All right, give them a round of applause, you all. My understanding is that there's at least 100 city and local governments represented in this event over the next couple of days. And again, we applaud your leadership and look forward to your engagement with the rest of the multiple stakeholders that are needed to achieve the adaptation across this country. So let me talk about who we have in Denise's Den. We have, of course, you've already heard from our mayor from St. Paul, who gave out the best, resolution today. But I don't think we heard too much about the mayor, so I'm going to introduce him very briefly. The mayor, you heard him this morning, said he's been in office for 12 years. That means he must be a pretty good politician and a very effective executive. He has been on the St. Paul City Council. He was doing integral work as a leader within his neighborhood and community. Immediately after taking office, the mayor set forth on a journey to revitalize the city of St. Paul with the ultimate goal of making his hometown the most livable city in America. It's my first time being here, and I can tell you it's an amazing and beautiful city. And his work is a part of what is making it more efficient, more resilient, including the investment he's made in infrastructure, including the creation of the Green Line, the Central Corridor light rail through downtown St. Paul and University Avenue, as well as championing downtown bicycle loop. And of course, this is all about adaptation, a brand new minor league baseball stadium, right? Which is important. Mayor, thank you. We look forward to your conversation with us today. Then we're going to jump down to the end, and we have Timothy Burrows. And what we have here, what's interesting is that we've got different geographic areas of the country talking about the work that's happening in municipal government, but we also have different staff positions and people working at different positions. So this should be a pretty dynamic conversation. And Timothy Burrows, he's the assistant to the city manager and chief resilience officer for the city of Berkeley, California. He manages the Office of Energy and Sustainable Development and leads the city's efforts to advance readiness for natural disasters and the impacts of climate change. And then next to Timothy, we have Kristen Baja. Christian is the Climate and Resilience Planner for the city of Baltimore, Maryland. So we have West, we have East, Midwest. Kristen is responsible for the development and implementation of the city's disaster preparedness project and plan, which is called DP3, which integrates climate adaptation and with hazard mitigation efforts. She's also responsible for climate change communication and outreach, community rating system certification, citywide resilience planning, and the STAR communications certification. She's active in many, many associations, which we won't name. All right. So let's get real. Let's start the conversation. And I think I would like each of you in this first question is to sort of pat yourself on the back and to tell us what you've done to bring your cities, to help your cities with others to adapt to climate change. What kind of local action have you taken? And not only sort of that really one important project that you'd like to call out, but what did it take to do it?
I'll start with just some of the things I talked about this morning, just the facility that you're in and the work that we've done here to have the solar installation on the roof. When the Minnesota Wild, our hockey team, unfortunately went to a crashing demise this spring, the last hockey game they had was the entire facility was being powered by wind on that day because of the partnership with Xcel Energy, the 70% of the recycling that occurs in this building. You look at the ballpark in Lower Town where I understand there was a reception yesterday that I wasn't invited to, thank you, that has a cistern that collects rainwater that then is used to irrigate. But it's not just about, there is no single project. I mean, there's lots of examples of great things that we've done. When we built the light rail line, we put a 5-mile long trench to collect stormwater to be able to irrigate the trees that were planted along there. There were 1,000 trees that were planted. Not only does that provide a ready source of water for the trees, but it also prevents a whole lot of pollutants from going into the Mississippi River. It's actually it was designed in such a way that it was actually the rainwater, stormwater infiltrates the ground and doesn't end up in the stormwater system going into the Mississippi River. It's all the little pieces of all the things that we've done. Retrofitting parking ramps, the lighting and parking ramps, which saves a tremendous amount of money. And I think that's one of the things that at the local level we understand. We're saving a lot of money by doing the things that we're doing. It's not just about the climate adaptation or resiliency. It is about actual financial bottom line for cities. And so there's a lot of work that we've done and to the house. It is important to have the partnerships. The agency that was building the light rail line had to buy into the strategy that we had. The neighborhood had to buy into the design for the systems, the funding sources that have to be cobbled together for all these projects. Having an energy partner that's the largest wind generator now in the United States with Xcel Energy has been that. And then just briefly, we are in the process of reimagining an old Ford motor manufacturing site, 130 acres along the banks of the Mississippi River. And we have been in the planning stages for what's going to happen on that site. And from the beginning, I've insisted that we incorporate sustainable energy and power sources on that site, sustainable environmental management and rainwater treatment, et cetera. And so as we go forward on that project, we're going to transform a whole section of the city of St. Paul from an old power plant into a thriving 21st century community. But it begins with incorporating sustainability into everything that we're doing there.
Great. Mr. Mayor, you talked to us a little bit about this morning, but if you could just tell the audience what you told me just a few minutes ago about, you said your wake-up call was 1991 or around that time, and sort of the financial and community impacts that we're having to the ice skating rinks, but what is the climate risk here about the ecosystems that are driving you to figure out resilient strategies for this region?
Well, in the 12 years I've been mayor, 5 of the top 15 flooding events on the Mississippi River have occurred. That is just direct out-of-pocket expense to the city of St. Paul. It poses tremendous risk for the people. You see the housing that we built along. When we built that, and that was done in the early 2000s, that was built in the above the 500-year floodplain. We never thought that that would, present much of a risk. I mean, we were certainly cognizant of how you design and build around that. But since that time, that 500-year floodplain or flood level has been challenged. We haven't exceeded it, but we keep on, having these nearing the 500-year flood levels on a regular basis now, and it seems in the city of St. Paul. But if you look at it from the statewide perspective, all the corn, the soybeans, the wheat, the products that we ship up and down the Mississippi River, the ability for us to export all of those goods is threatened when we have extreme drought or extreme flooding on the Mississippi River. So it has a potential, disastrous potential for our economy in the state of Minnesota if we don't deal with this. And that's why with Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, the 75 mayors that are part of that organization, a lot of them can't use the words climate change because politically they're not in a position to do that. But the one thing that you recognize on a local level is the economic impacts of what's happening. And so whether you use the phrase or don't use the phrase, they understand the importance of adaptation and mitigation for the work that we're doing.
Great, thank you. Kristen, what's up in Baltimore? What are the climate risks in Baltimore? And what is your sort of one local action that's actually made a difference, and how'd you get it?
Yeah, so there's lots of great things happening in Baltimore. Baltimore is a fantastic city. You should all come visit sometime. We're a city of 622,000 people that happens to be incredibly impacted by water. We're at the top of the Chesapeake Bay and also at the base of 4 major watersheds. So what's happening with precipitation variability and precipitation is really what's impacting a lot of our infrastructure, our people, and also high heat. So those are kind of 2 major issues right now, and I think they will continue to be. I want to point out that you're asking, what I've done. It's actually not what I've done. It's what all the amazing residents in our community and our community partners and our nonprofit community and our private partnerships have done, our institutions, to make Baltimore a better place. And I think one of the things that we've really focused on over the last 4 years has been coming at adaptation and climate change from a healing perspective. Baltimore has a unfortunate history of segregation and racism, redlining that we try to openly acknowledge and talk about privilege and why we have certain residents that are more at risk than others, our frontline communities that are continuing to be our frontline communities in dealing with high heat and precipitation variability. And so we started with a planning process that thought more about the bottom-up approach and how we're marrying the bottom-up approach with sort of the old top-down. And that was to go out to where people are and have conversations and try to start building relationships and trust that has been really damaged for a long period of time. In that, meeting people in locations that they trusted, going to their homes, going to their churches, going to their recreation centers, and having conversations. And instead of bringing something that has already been developed, actually being an active listener and gathering their stories and understanding that they're the experts and making sure that they felt like experts. So trying to also go beyond sort of the one and done mentality where you go to one meeting and we've hit that community, we're good. Instead, continuing to build relationships, continuing to go back, continuing to make sure that people felt part of the process and that beyond sort of just storytelling, then what were their ideas for how we can move forward in both preparedness, but also sort of thriving in what we're seeing with climate change. And so beyond that planning process, you mentioned the DP3 plan. We've moved into really looking at preparedness at an individual level and then at a neighborhood level. And we started with a concept of make a plan, build a kit, help each other. People always asked, well, what do we do? You're scaring the heck out of us with all this information. And yes, we know things are getting worse. So we talked about working together to build plans and develop plans, also to develop kits. We didn't just hand kits out, but we actually went through what would you need in a kit, what would you like in a kit, and then providing those for free and building them with people. And the last part of the help each other was really focused on how do we build community cohesion and focus on neighborhoods and neighborliness, and that was about asset mapping and having people understand the assets and shortcomings in the communities and developing buddy systems. And what came of those meetings, we had over 40 of them and distributed nearly 3,000 kits, was that people didn't have a place to go when they lost power. They didn't have the heating and cooling resources that they needed, and they didn't have the communications resources. They were also the communities that, quite honestly, are still ignored when we have a large event. We tend to clear the inner harbor first and our major corridors rather than focusing on areas where people live. So we've moved into looking at neighborhood resilience and again, working with listening and saying, what is it you need? And people say, well, we need a place we can go, a place that we trust, that's not owned by the city. And so we have started to, we put together a couple proposals to retrofit buildings in 4 communities that are most vulnerable to high heat and flooding, and have asked, beyond solar with battery backup systems and cool roofs and energy efficiency upgrades, what do you need to be able to prepare and respond and feel like you're supported? And so it's really been an ongoing process over this last year of developing lists of supplies and materials and support systems and trainings and other things, and we're calling them our resiliency hubs. And so they are managed by members of the community. They are completely run by members of the community with the support of city departments and other private partners. And we're going to probably see them be pretty actively used this summer with the heat that we're seeing in Baltimore. So I'd say that's one thing that we're working towards that's, again, more along the lines of it being community-led, community-managed, and really about empowering people to be able to take action without relying on the city.
Great. Could I just, one follow-up question is when, I'm dropping everything. Thank you, Mayor. Gee, I never had a mayor do this for me. Thank you very much. It's a very hospitable city, isn't it? When did the light bulbs turn on in the city of Baltimore? You know, who and when did the word resilience, you know, when did that start, and what was the precipitating element and that sort of made resilience a thing in Baltimore?
Well, I think when we started with the using of the all-hazard mitigation plan and incorporating climate adaptation and climate mitigation into that, you get into a confusing number of terms that are really not understood. You know, hazard mitigation, what's its difference from climate mitigation, what's the difference from climate adaptation, and then we have preparedness. And so, quite honestly, we don't use resilience as often as we use disaster preparedness, because members of the community at the time we were doing this said, we have no idea what that means. Since then, we've gone through a lot of different workshops and sessions to identify with members of the community and our other partners what resilience does mean to the city of Baltimore, and so I think that's kind of been evolving. But disaster preparedness is really where we started, and community preparedness, and resilience has kind of jumped on board with that recently, and we've really looked at resilience as a way to positively adapt and thrive, and that really being the focus of what we think with resilience.
Great, thank you. Timothy, tell us about Berkeley. What are your climate risks and what are your climate actions that you want to wave the flag about?
Sure, thank you, Denise. It's inspiring to hear about the work in St. Paul and Baltimore. It always is. So part of my job is to help Berkeley, our community, prepare for a whole wide range of the challenges that we face, and some of those challenges are physical, like earthquakes and drought and the impacts of climate change, and some of those challenges are social or economic. And so we like to take a very integrated approach where we try and design solutions that don't necessarily solve all of our problems, but each of the solutions that we work on at least tries to solve more than one problem at once. And so I'll just give you an example of what that looks like in Berkeley. One of the things we're working on right now is figuring out how to improve backup power to critical facilities in Berkeley, like our City Hall and our Emergency Operations Center, senior and community centers that serve thousands of people every day and have a disaster response and recovery function. We looked at what happened in the wake of Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina, and we saw the impacts there. And one of the impacts that stuck out for us, especially for a city that is in a region that's affected by earthquakes, is that many communities in those areas were crippled for days and weeks and didn't have access to reliable power. And that caused a sort of a cascading set of impacts that made it more difficult for cities and communities to provide people with the resources and the help that they needed at a time when they needed it most. And so we started to think about, in the context of resilience and how we address resilience, how do we do backup power differently, and how do we do it better? And traditionally in Berkeley, like in many of your cities, we use a diesel generator and we hook it up to a building, and hopefully we maintain it, and hopefully it turns on when the power goes out. And a diesel generator has its place, but it also has a very narrow benefit. It just provides backup power, and it has a lot of downsides, like reliance on diesel and air pollution and noise. And so we started to ask the question, how do you do backup power differently? And we started to think about this concept of microgrids, which many of you are probably familiar with, and many of you are probably working on. But for those of you that are not, a microgrid enables one building or multiple facilities to operate independently of the grid, of the main grid. And you can power a microgrid with distributed sources of clean energy, like solar and energy storage batteries. So that microgrid can continue to operate using clean sources of power even when the main grid is disrupted. And so a microgrid provides the same benefit that a diesel generator does, but it also provides environmental benefits because you're using clean sources of power. And you can also save money on the cost of energy through distributed energy resources. So we partnered with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which we're lucky to have in our backyard, and we went out and got a grant from the California Energy Commission to design one of the first urban multi-facility microgrids in the country that we're aware of. And the anchor for this microgrid project is a new downtown Berkeley parking garage. And this garage is a very, very Berkeley garage. This garage has a large, what's being built right now, it has a large solar installation on the roof. It has space for energy storage batteries that can store that solar. It has valet bicycle parking. It has a rainwater catchment system. It has an art gallery on the first floor. And I'd like to say that it has like a t-shirt tie-dyeing station on the first floor, but that would be going a little bit too far. It doesn't have that. But it has all of those other things are true. And the idea is that we take the power from this garage, which doesn't have a huge energy load, and we're going to share that power with City Hall, which is just down the block from the Center Street garage, and also our public safety building, which houses our 911 operations and a jail, and another administrative building that's near there. And so when the power is disrupted, clean energy from the Center Street garage in downtown Berkeley can be shared with these other facilities. And that, I think, is a great example of what resilience looks like, which is this term that everybody's got a different definition for. But when it really comes down to what resilience is, it's solutions that create multiple benefits and address multiple challenges at once. And a microgrid is a great example of what that looks like. It's a much different solution than a diesel generator, but it creates the same solution that a generator does on top of the other benefits that it provides.
So my follow-up question to you is, how did you get into this work? I mean, what's the driver for you? What's your passion about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like probably many people in this room, I worked in sustainability. I was the sustainability director for the city of Berkeley. And I think sustainability staff and those of us that work on climate and sustainability are really well positioned, maybe more so than almost any other field, to think about these integrated approaches to improving the communities that we live in, right? Because we know that the issues that we work on, like climate change, it's not just the polar bears, right? It's the people that climate affects. It's not just somewhere else. It's happening here in our communities. There's social impacts, there's economic impacts, there's physical impacts, and we really understand that in the sustainability field. And to be effective as a sustainability practitioner, you have to understand the integrated impacts and the fact that the solutions must also be integrated. So the most effective sustainability directors are the ones that know their public works directors and staff really well. They work really closely with the mayor and the council. They know the park staff, they know the finance staff, and the sustainability work is integrated into everything that the city does. That's how you can be most effective as a sustainability director. So for me, that's sort of how I came up through the city, and then took on the Chief Resilience Officer role. I just felt really well positioned and really well placed to kind of carry that philosophy forward to the full operations of the city.
Well, I would like to come back to you, Mr. Mayor, and ask, why does government matter? And we have, resilience really requires a whole set of actors and stakeholders, and we'll hear from them later during the week, you know, whether it's the community, it's the business sector, and what's the role of government? What can government do? What should government do? What is it that government shouldn't be doing?
Boy, that's actually a longer topic. There's a lot that we shouldn't be doing. But look, in the absence of action on the federal level, government, and I define that as primarily city and county government. We happen to have in Ramsey County, where you're in right now, a really strong county board that understands the importance of mitigation and adaptation strategies. We actually can set the footprint, or set the path forward rather, for how we deal with some of these things. The mayor's compact that we're working on, we are, you know, Mayor Bloomberg, or former Mayor Bloomberg, kind of set cities across the globe involved in setting, you know, a path forward for dealing with these issues. Really looking at where our emissions are coming from. We just completed our inventory. I realized that while, you know, between transportation, which accounts for about 37% of our emissions, we found out that people drive, you know, millions and millions of miles in the city of St. Paul every year. Knowing that allows us to kind of focus in on strategies. How do we reduce the need for people getting in a private car and driving around? How do we increase access to bike paths? How do we make it a more walkable city so that people don't have to do I mean, the solutions lie within the work that we do as cities. And I think the point about integrating your sustainability coordinator with every department that you have is critically important. This isn't just a person sitting in the corner office of the third floor of City Hall in our case. And Ann Hunt, my sustainability coordinator, has really integrated all of these approaches in every department that we have. No one is. I mean, to me, it's the same thing with an equity strategy. That can't just be, oh, here's your equity person. This has got to be the work of the Public Works Department and your parks and your police and your fire and everybody else. And so there's so much that we can do. First of all, knowing where our emissions are coming from, then setting out very specific and obtainable goals as a result of it, and then figuring out who the partnerships are going to be. If we're going to get to a carbon neutral, our carbon neutral goal by 2040 or 2050, I hope I didn't just advance it by a decade. We're going to say 2030. But that takes partnership, and mayors are in a unique position to build those partnerships.
Great. And it's a similar question. What does the community look to you for, the business community look to government to do for them in this work of climate adaptation? Is there a particular role that you see yourself playing in advancing climate adaptation as government?
Sure. I mean, I think government plays a role of a connector and really looking at relationship building. That's critically important. Like I mentioned, sort of trust building. I think that connecting, though, and as Timothy was saying, the sustainability directors are really well suited for this because they understand that sustainability is part of everything. And climate is really, climate change and equity are part of everything as well. And so having those connections, having those relationships, and continuing to build relationships and build trust, being active listeners, empathizing with where people are coming from, and that's other departments who are dealing with different criteria or financial restrictions, to a community member who does not have enough money to put aside an extra can of food that day. So it's really being that connector, I think, that enabler and that active listener, and being able to identify resources to the best of your ability where they exist and leverage those resources.
Yeah. Can I ask you, what kind of resources can the city bring to climate adaptation work? Is it coming out of the capital budget? Do you getting special foundation funding? What kind of resources are available to drive results? And anyone can. And by the way, Denise's Den, anybody can riff.
Anybody can jump in?
Anybody can riff and pick
All right,
up
I'll
the
jump
question.
in.
Okay.
The resources, this may sound naive, but I think that a lot of time the issue is not necessarily a lack of resources. It's really sometimes a lack of creativity or a lack of leadership around how you bring resources to a problem. So in Berkeley, and I think in most cities, sure, we go after grant fundings from local foundations, from state and federal government. We use our own resources to try and solve problems. But it really starts with figuring out and being very articulate about what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And part of my job is to be very clear on what the challenges are that we face, so that everyone kind of gets a better understanding of them, and then developing integrated solutions to address those challenges. So around climate, one example, we have flooding in Berkeley. And flooding is one of the issues that certainly is affected by climate change. But the underlying challenge of flooding actually has nothing to do with climate change. It has to do with the fact that we have 100 miles of 100-year-old stormwater infrastructure. And probably every city in the country faces this challenge, where you've got this aging, degrading infrastructure that over time it's been difficult to maintain, right? It's hard to maintain the resources you need to continually upgrade and improve the infrastructure that we have. So you start with this old aging system, which is a problem in and of itself. It's already leaky, right? And then you throw on top of that climate change, and it just makes this existing stress even worse. So in Berkeley, you have sea level rise in the San Francisco Bay. So the stormwater, as it flows through the city, now it's having more and more difficult time getting out to the bay, because the seawater is flooding the outlet of the stormwater pipes. And then you have more extreme rain events, which also exacerbate this existing challenge. So it's important for us to think about the challenge in the integrated way that it actually is. It's not just climate, it's not just infrastructure, it's all of those things together. And I think if you frame it that way, it helps lead to a more productive conversation around how not only the challenge is integrated, but the solutions also have to be integrated. So green infrastructure can come into play, right? So we have green infrastructure that addresses flooding, but it also helps remove pollutants from the stormwater. It creates another benefit on top of the flood reduction benefit. Get people excited about that, get some pilots through some grant funding, and then start to integrate that type of work into your ongoing capital budget, which is what we're trying to do in Berkeley.
And I think, when we talk about resources, it's not just a huge outlay of cash necessarily. We can use our city financing tools or our partner financing tools to help businesses do going through their buildings and operations and trying to find energy efficiencies. We have a project called, with our Port Authority, that worked up and down the green line, which is the light rail line, to help businesses finance their energy efficiency upgrades, and and then pay back through the cost savings that they receive. That wasn't a huge outlay of cash on our part. And I think, as Jim was saying, a lot of the stuff you're doing it anyway. So the question is, are you gonna, when you're making this expenditure, are you thinking 100 years into the future about what it is that you're spending money on, or are you doing it in a way that might have been appropriate in 1950 but is no longer appropriate today? There are ways, quite frankly, that what we do saves us money, not just on like energy efficient light bulbs, but how we treat our streets before a snow emergency is declared. using a brine that reduces the amount of salt and has a better effectiveness is a lot cheaper solution for us. And so when we think about the resources that you have to put into these, it is not like, oh, we need to find $1 billion. We just need to be a lot smarter about what it is that we're doing.
So in the context of this integrated approach that you all are talking about, that means you have to harness the Public Works Department and the Planning Department and all these other departments to get it. Is that hard? Do you systematically and intentionally build your staff capacity around climate adaptation to begin to look at the blueprint differently or to look at the plans differently? And what kind of investment of human capital development of your staff is involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be very deliberate about making sure that staff understand, and I'm going to say beyond staff, all your stakeholders, all your partners, and there are creative ways to do that, and I'm going to tie it back actually to the last question with the funding. I think one of the key things is actually in adaptation, we need to be innovative, and we need to be able to be innovative with our approaches, and sometimes foundations or other sources of funding are all that allow that kind of innovation and that creativity to happen. And one of the roles of government is to then leverage that and connect that to some of the other pieces that Tim and the mayor were talking about. So,
no one would ever think of government as being innovative, but
we're
this
trying.
is okay.
But I think part of that, and one of the examples I would give is there is some really great and innovative staff training that's been happening in Fort Lauderdale and Salt Lake City around training all of their staff on climate change and sort of mandating that staff go through Climate 101. And one of the great opportunities that the city of Seattle and Baltimore got together was to then build upon that to create a climate training sort of 201 that was an interactive game that trains sort of decision makers and middle-level managers on vulnerability assessments. But instead of just sitting in a time where you're going through PowerPoints, our typical trainings, it's actually a creative, interactive, 6-hour sort of fun session that we had a lot of other inputs from other cities on. And I think being able to have that kind of innovation and that kind of creativity really helps with that.
Well, I was going to say, if you don't do that, if you don't embed all of these things throughout every one of your employees, then the next mayor or next city council members can come along and very, very easily undo that. And so, this has been a priority of mine. When I ran in 2005, one of the things I said during the course of the campaign was my first act in office would be to sign the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement that Mayor Nichols from Seattle had put forth through the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And then we set forth a strategy. But if it was only one person working out of my office, then the next mayor might choose to focus in on a different area. But when you embed it into your Public Works Department, when you embed it into your Planning Department, when you embed it in through all of your departments, and then you empower all of those employees to take their own kind of steps and kind of figure out what it is, then that work lasts. And I think that the one thing that mayors want more than anything is for their work to go on after they're no longer in this office, because you never quite ever get done being mayor. You're always going to be still kind of view yourself in that role. And so the worst thing that could happen is when I'm done being mayor in December, to walk out and know that the work that we're doing on climate protection is no longer part of the agenda of the city of St. Paul. That would be a disaster.
I want to leverage that, but I see, Tim,
Yeah,
you've got your hand
I want to
raised.
add to that because I love geeking out on this topic. I love that. I love the part of my job that I love the most is the challenge of making sustainability a part of the operations of the city. And I've been working on this in Berkeley for 10 years, and I feel like I'm still scratching the surface, right? Even though we've had some success. So it's like a lifetime work for all of us that's never really done. But I think it's important to think about how you integrate. And Kristen mentioned a few great things, like training for staff is actually key, especially if you maintain that training over time. If you do one training and then you turn your attention to something else, then it will die just as quickly as you turn your attention to something else, right? So I think part of the thing that's important, that's been useful for me, is whenever we're in the midst of any kind of planning process, like a climate planning or an adaptation planning, sustainability planning process, you need to ask the question of your mayor and your city manager and your department directors, what are the things that you're already trying to do? What are your key priorities? Don't even think about climate change. What are the things that you already need to get done? And having a clear understanding from the public works director that there's 1,000 miles of streets that need to be paved, and there's 100 miles of stormwater infrastructure that have deferred maintenance. Understanding that is really important, because then you can layer your work onto that, right? So, you need stormwater upgrades. I can bring some resources to the table that helps you deal with that flooding problem, but deal with it in a way that's different than what we've done in the past. Not just a bigger, longer stormwater pipe, but some permeable pavement and a cistern to capture that stormwater. And his problem or her problem is solved, and you're creating a sustainability benefit. But it starts with asking that question: what are the priorities of the leadership of the city? And then getting into that, figuring out what those priorities are and working closely with that. Because if you're not there, then you are just kind of an isolated green staff person in the corner. I think the other thing that's important, if possible, is to have sustainability staff at the executive level within the organization. This isn't a necessary prerequisite, but it helps to have people that are passionate about sustainability in positions of authority within the organization. So we have that here with the mayor of St. Paul. In Berkeley, many of our department directors have found religion around sustainability because they see it as an integrated part of the work that we do. But without that, you're just a division of sustainability staff sort of always knocking on the door trying to get into that meeting. You need somebody on the inside of the meeting that's advocating for you.
Right, this is great. Well, I have two other sets of questions. We talked about projects, we've talked a little bit about process. I want to talk about people, and I want to talk about politics. But before we do that, I have a procedural question. Now, I understand I can't take questions from the floor unless you tweet them. Does somebody have some answer to how we're going to do that? Because you're asking the wrong person about Twitter and tweeting. All right. We'll figure this. Laura, you have a way to... I think we could be more democratic here. Okay. I think that if someone has a question and you stand up and you have a projecting voice like apparently Sasha Peterson does, you can do that. But I'll also run to the back and get a roaming mic, and I'll be... Okay. And kind of come up here so that we can hear you, and I'll repeat the question. Well, thank you for that, because I was unclear about how that was going to happen. And the last thing is I need somebody time check us. I'm not sure where we are, but that would be helpful. No one has a watch anymore. 10:27. 10:27. So, all right. So let's talk about people. Now, Mayor Coleman, you talked about something that is very important for me. I work out of the community. I'm from the community, and I look at government in a different kind of way. I see whether or not I can get anything done based on your watch, right? Is it going to be within 4 years or 8 years, and then you're gone? And you guys are amazing leaders. You're pushing this climate adaptation agenda, but when you're gone, if it isn't embedded in the institutions and in the agencies, then we have to reset the clock with the next mayor who wants his or her agenda to be the stamp of the future and her name on it. So we start from the beginning. So for me, I think I'd like to hear your thoughts about, besides building capacity within the city, what are you doing to build the civic capacity, the civic infrastructure around climate change, resilience, and adaptation? Because whoever comes in, a la the 45th, but anyway, whoever comes in, it doesn't matter who the political leader is if you have a strong civic infrastructure that says, Mr. and Ms. Mayor, welcome, we're on page 57. Okay, we are not starting on page 1. So how do we think about the civic infrastructure? What are you doing, and how do we build this out? And I'd like to talk to Kristen and come back around, but this was leveraged out of your sense of wanting to build a legacy. So let's start with Kristen and then Mayor.
I think that there's a way to make sure that people have the resources and the information, and that the partners, and again, it can't just be reliant on the mayor or the city council, and so One of the things I think is really important as far as relationship building and trust building is also to empower people with information and empower them to feel like they can demand what they want and to have a voice. And so a way that we've looked at that is actually to train ambassadors. So I'm not the person who looks like the majority of people in Baltimore City, and I don't plan to be. I don't pretend to be. Basically, it's acknowledging that we need to empower other people with the information and have them act as the ambassadors in their community to have the conversations and then to act as a bridge or a resource, not only just for engagement and information gathering, but also for implementation partnerships and pushing on city council members and the mayor, because they're the ones who elect those folks to make change. And I think that that's where continuity can happen outside of government and with government. If we're continuing to empower people, we're continuing to provide resources, we're continuing to be transparent and give information and build relationships. And we've trained 150 ambassadors on climate change and sustainability who have gone out and had 5 to 10 interactions with somebody in their community to gather information on our sustainability plan update, on our resiliency planning. That continues, and that continues to grow, and it continues to be something that they see as valuable and important, and that they press back. So I think that's one way to do it, and I think that it needs to, that's where the continuity happens, is with those groups.
We have an amazingly engaged civic-minded individuals in the city of St. Paul. Sometimes that makes it difficult in the city because people are demanding that you do things. And it was really through, it's called the district council system. It was established in the early 70s, and so we have 17 different neighborhood councils that are actually extensions in many ways. They are kind of community-based organizations, but they're an extension of City Hall into the neighborhoods, and through that, really civic-minded, engaged individuals have been bringing ideas to the city and kind of showing how other neighborhoods can be working on some of those issues. So the work that we've done on organized trash collection, which we're in the middle of a process right now, which we know is going to be incredibly important. It's a very difficult process to go, but that was an idea that was brought to us from neighborhood organizations. Single sort recycling that we went to this past year was really, I don't want to say it all has bubbled up, but clearly a lot of these areas and these issues that we're working on, neighborhood gardens. We have a neighborhood called the Frogtown neighborhood, which is a low-income neighborhood. They came and said, we don't have green space in our neighborhood. So there was an opportunity for us to take that on. Worked with Trust for Public Land, created a community garden and a green space in a neighborhood that had been tremendously underserved. But that was a bottom-up approach. So we talk sometimes about bottom-up approach from the city to the federal government, but really from the neighborhood up to the city hall is the most effective way. So if you think you like to geek out on these topics as a sustainability coordinator, you should talk to some of the folks in our neighborhood who can go to 15 layers deep on any one of these issues. And it has really helped drive the agenda and the work that we've done. And that will survive whoever the next mayor is. If they're not responsive to that, they're not going to be mayor for very long.
Tim, just pushing this conversation a little further, we know Berkeley is a hotbed of activism and community engagement, but is it anything different or unique or special about reaching low-income communities of color to be engaged on this particular issue, particularly in the context of, as we call them, the multiple threats of communities of just trying to meet basic survival, day-to-day survival issues? What if anything, needs to be done, is being done at the city level to engage vulnerable populations?
Well, I think cities have to acknowledge that it's for many years and even today that all levels of government have contributed to the disparities that exist in our communities through federal, state, and local policies. And we have to acknowledge and we have to understand what those disparities are in our community. And it's not an accident, it's actually by design, many of the disparities in our community. If you look across any indicator of community well-being, whether it be health or education or income. You see that across the country in all of our cities, and governments have contributed to that, and governments have to lead in doing something about it. And so we have to be, we have to be leaders. And we are not the only organization in our community that can do something about the disparities that we face, but we are a leading organization, and we have to step up to that challenge. And so it's difficult, but one of the ways that we can at least all start to do it is by asking ourselves some simple questions. When we design a program, or we design a policy, or we're designing outreach, we want our community members to take advantage of a given service. You have to at least stop and ask the question, how is this policy or program service, how is this benefit or burden communities of color in my city, or low-income communities in my city? Is this going to help the people that need the most help, or is this going to make it more difficult for the people that need more help? You have to at least pause and ask that question. And some cities are really advanced at asking that question. They've developed equity toolkits. It's something that we're in the process of developing right now. We're about to apply an equity lens process to a land use planning process that's happening in South Berkeley, where gentrification is really moving quite rapidly. And it really is just a simple set of questions that you engage with the community that's being impacted, with government, with other stakeholders, and getting to the bottom of what's going to benefit this community and what's going to burden this community, and how can I do things a little bit differently, applying an equity lens to the work that we do. We really have to lead on that.
And I want to build on that a little bit, and I agree with Tim. One of the things with the equity lens, though, is in beyond engagement, it's actually involvement throughout the entire process, and having representation on internal steering committees, advisory committees, any sort of special stakeholder group, and also removing barriers to participation. Again, this idea of the one meeting and done approach. A lot of people can't show up to meetings because they can't get their transportation issues, or they need to put food on the table that night, or they don't have childcare. So acknowledging that there is also barriers that have to be removed in order for effective engagement, involvement, and then ongoing involvement, and making sure that we're prioritizing going to people in places that they trust, and empowering them to participate.
Yeah, I think that's right? We know that many people, it's just not practical for people to come to a meeting in the evening or even on a weekend or whatever, right? So then you have to ask yourself the question, if you really want to reach people that can't come to a public meeting, then how can you do it? How can you do it differently? And that really starts to change how you do outreach and how you design your programs and your services. I think one approach that I know Kristen uses a lot in Baltimore is also figuring out who the existing leaders are within the neighborhoods and within the communities, and building partnerships with the existing leaders in the community, the churches, the cultural institutions, the other types of organizations that already serve hundreds and thousands of people every day. And they can be partners with the city and sort of be a liaison with the services that we provide as a city to the people that they already serve. And we're doing a lot of that work in Berkeley. We're providing training and disaster preparedness supplies and services in partnership with organizations that are already serving people in the community where people already gather.
Make it fun. Has to be fun.
Make it fun.
Gotta do something interactive.
And serve food.
I'm going to ask if you have any questions. If you want to, please start queuing up. I could be at this all day, so you don't have to show up, but we want to hear from you. I want to ask a couple more questions, and if anybody has any questions, come closer to us so that we can see you. And as they do that, I'm sure there will be some of you coming forward. A couple of things. Engagement and organizing, involvement and participation is good. But what about economic resilience? Because at the end of the day, people are resilient when there's money in the pocket, when they're able to, get the transportation and get the housing that will withstand the hurricanes. And do you think about economic resilience as a part of your adaptation strategy, and what, if anything, is happening in that space?
Well, I think, and I don't know if this is exactly right, but as we look at talking about affordable housing, we look at what is the actual cost of living somewhere in terms of not just a rent payment, but how much is it cost to heat the building? Because in Minnesota, that can be, heat and cooling can be a huge part of the budget. Do you have access to transportation? How close are you? Do you have access to bike pathways? Do you have, is it walkable for you to get to a job? I mean, all these things become critically important in the overall, what does it actually cost to live in a community? And are people, are we taking that into consideration? So you can have an affordable house because it's rent subsidized, but if all the other costs in that person's life, including urban food deserts where food prices are much more expensive and the nutritional quality is much less, that gets factored into this thing. And so we do look at all of those factors as we think about what is truly affordable and how do we help boost economic vitality of members of our community.
Any other?
Yeah, I mean, it's multiple benefits, economic, social, environmental, they all have to go together. It's critical, I think, for success, and certainly saving money and saving people money, whether their health improves so they don't have to pay healthcare bills, or it's simple energy retrofits, or savings by connecting them to some of the microgrid solutions that Timothy was talking about. There's lots of options and lots of opportunities for that, but it's a critical element, I think, of any process.
And I think making money is a good thing too, because the investment that you are making in each of your cities, the infrastructure investments, represent job opportunities, and being able to ensure that folks that have been on the mainstream, the periphery of the mainstream, kind of get to be able to participate in the construction work, the energy efficiency work, the tree planting work is an intentional part of the planning process.
Yeah, I think this is part of my frustration with what's happening right now on the federal level, is we're ceding a whole sector of an economy to other countries because we're denying climate change. And if we would embrace that, we would be able to produce really good paying jobs across the entire country. The fact of the matter is we have low unemployment, but we don't have the quality of employment that we really need for our communities members to be successful. And so I think that we need to look at some of these strategies, how to incorporate the work that we're done. If you're an electrician that's installing solar panels, you're putting food on the table. You're paying the mortgage. These are some of the things that we should be promoting and pushing instead of just kind of giving it to other countries.
We'll be getting to your questions in a minute. In a quick response.
Yeah, I have to jump in because I had a really cool experience a couple of weeks ago. We got a grant in Berkeley from Partners for Places. Is anyone here representing Partners for Places? Anybody who's had grants before from Partners for Places? So a partnership with USDN, Urban Sustainability Directors Network, give funding to cities, and you team up with a community-based foundation, and Partners for Places will match that funding. Well, we got funding in partnership with Grid Alternatives, which is an awesome organization that installs solar on low-income housing. And it's just this great, that work that Grid does, that we did in partnership with Grid, is this great marriage of sustainability and financial stability. We installed solar on a number of low-income homes. I went to the homes as the solar was being installed. It was being installed by trainees from the Rising Sun Energy Center, which trains low-income residents in Berkeley on solar installation. They were putting the solar on the roof. I met this woman, amazing 90-year-old woman, came out, and I was asking her about her solar. And the thing she said to me, she says, I don't know much about solar, but I do know that it's going to eliminate my electricity bill, and I'm pretty happy about that. So that was a pretty valuable, pretty cool experience to meet her and see the impact that this clean energy solution was having on her electricity bill.
And I would say this is another opportunity to really think about education and how we're engaging with youth, and beginning to integrate that into a lot of curriculum and curriculum building, and working with younger folks to build skills around what's happening sort of with these green technologies and green skills and job programs as well.
Great. So I know we have people outside. All right. Let's go to the audience and tell us your name and make your questions brief, and let's make our answers brief.
Okay, my name is Teresa, and first of all, I want to say I'm a Baltimore girl, so kudos for being up there. I also want to say that I'm a research sociologist with NOAA. I think I can say that here safely. One of my questions is, so we do research on vulnerability, community vulnerability assessment. I was on the ground 3 weeks after Katrina, so everything that people are saying here this morning resonates with me. And one of the things that we think about is how do we better connect the research that we're doing, the questions that we're asking, to the folks on the ground who need that information the most. It's something that we think about all the time, the tools that we create. So my question to you is, how do your communities connect to the scientific community and scientists particularly, and how can we better improve those connections so that we are creating the information that you guys can use in your adaptation planning? Thank you.
So I don't mean to be a little aggressive about this response, but I think it would be great to stop creating toolkits until the toolkits. Well, we have a lot of toolkits out there, and it's a bit overwhelming, and I think often the toolkits are developed with a group of folks who are coming from a higher level, identifying a problem and saying, we're going to create a toolkit for this, and it's going to be for members of the community or for local government. But they don't bring in members of the community or local government to ask, is this actually what you need? Is this the toolkit that you need? So I think that there's a real connection needed, and this is where you can use people like myself or Timothy, possibly even the mayor, to come in and identify the community organizations, community leaders, other folks, and ask, what do you really need? Where's their information lacking? What is the question that hasn't been answered? And what is the way that science can support that? Is it a toolkit, or is it something else? Or do you want us to just look through the 5,000 green infrastructure toolkits and tell you which one's the best one to use? So that would be my response.
I'm going to leave it at that. That's enough. That's a good answer.
Ditto.
All right. Unless, okay. Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Alex Hurley, master's student, environmental studies, the Voinovich School at Ohio University. And my question is, what is the role of local government in regional climate adaptation? So even local governments to other local governments, cities to cities, talking with one another. Just interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I think that, we should be looking at these things from a regional perspective. I spoke yesterday to Regional Council of Mayors, which is a group of mayors throughout the Twin Cities area, to just talk about the work that we're doing in the city of St. Paul. And to kind of show the examples of what cities can be doing, because we learn from each other, obviously, and that's critically important. But I also think one of the things that we talked about is from a regional standpoint, being able to promote your community as a green, forward-thinking community, a sustainable and an equitable community, is critically important as you're trying to lure jobs and businesses that are coming into your community. Workers that have choices to go anywhere in the world are increasingly wanting to land in communities that are thinking about these issues. And so from a regional standpoint, talking about these things from an economic development standpoint is also important. And it can't just be one city in a region. It really has to be the whole Bay Area or the whole Twin Cities area, and that whole between Washington and Baltimore. There's a lot of opportunities there to think regionally.
And I just have one addition to that is there's a really amazing organization for sustainability directors called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network that allows us to connect with folks within our regions and also throughout the entire country, US and Canada, that is supportive. It's run by sustainability directors and climate staff, and it Timothy talked about the Innovation Fund grant. There's Partnerships for Places grants. There's opportunities for funding and gatherings and really information sharing. So that's a really vital network. I think that's leading the way right now.
In addition to what's said, the other aspect of regional collaboration that can be useful and important is cities in a region can band together to get something that they want more effectively than if it's just one city. So for example, many cities struggle with access to energy data from their utility to help measure their emissions in an ongoing way, or struggle with getting access to other types of data or other types of funding. If it's just Berkeley saying, we really need this, we really want this, that's one thing. But if it's Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, Fremont, Hayward, and all the cities in the Bay Area asking for it, there's a lot more strength to that. And I think we probably don't utilize that enough, that collaboration and coordination across the region enough. I think there's way more potential there than we take advantage of.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi, my name is Kimberly Hill Nod, and I am with Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice. And my question to you is, how are you working with local nonprofit and local job training agencies to prepare those communities most impacted by pollution and most likely to be left behind as we're shifting to a clean energy economy? So what does that partnership look like? Thank you.
You want me to go on?
I see a long queue, so we'll
Yeah,
make it,
yeah, sorry. Making sure that those organizations have a place at the table at the very, very beginning of the process in its incubation stage and throughout the entire process, and understanding their skill sets and really trying to take advantage of those skill sets. There's a lot of folks out there beyond city government doing amazing work that we want to connect to and empower and provide resources and support to, and I think that they're vital and critical to success and resilience.
You know, sustainability just can't be the province of middle-class white people. It has to be about everyone in the community and the benefits of it, understanding the consequences of climate change impacted in low-income communities and communities of color. But I think it's some of the work that we talked about just in terms of embedding sustainability into every department. In the city of St. Paul, we have embedded racial equity and implicit bias training in every department. 2,700 employees in the city of St. Paul, 2,700 employees have gone through that equity training. And so what they're hopefully coming out of those sessions from is when they ask the questions about our work on sustainability, they are putting that equitable lens to it. So whether it's a job issue or an affordable housing issue or a transportation issue, whatever it might be, we're asking those questions. And so it's drawing the dots, getting out of silos, and understanding that everything that we do impacts everything else that we do. And that is just the holistic approach you have to take.
And I'm going to throw in on this one in the sense that, thank you, I definitely need that time check. We have 10 minutes. The Emerald Cities, that's what we do. We work, for example, we do the economic inclusion work for the Southern California Energy Efficiency Network, which is a network of over 120 local jurisdictions. It's a one-stop shop for them, and our job is to help them make sure that the contracts that are being done, or whether it's solar, zero net energy buildings, which is their target, includes small minority women, veteran-owned contractors, and so we build a program for that, as well as disadvantaged workers. And so it's got to be built into the policies for the infrastructure investments, and it's got to be the implementation tools, including the training on the supply side and monitoring and compliance, are all critical to a comprehensive approach to making sure economic inclusion works. And we've done that with the mayor's office in New Orleans, built an entire economic inclusion platform, because you can set the goals, but if you don't have the implementation vehicles and work supply side with the demand side, it's not going to work well. Let's see, we've got, maybe we can take two more very quick questions, and I want then our amazing panelists to sort of come up with some summary thoughts.
Thank you. My name is Ian Miller. I'm from the Sea Grant program in Washington State, and I live in a smaller metropolitan area of 19,000 people. And I'm wondering if you guys have thought about the differences between how you might approach this problem if you were representing or from a smaller kind of city or even a rural area versus how you've approached it from the standpoint of a larger city.
Well, I think one thing I try to remember is, I'm only a large city by comparison to a city of 19,000, but when you start comparing to Chicago or New York or Houston, we're a relatively small community. And so even when we've had to do some of the work that we've done, we partnered with ICLEI and others to do our greenhouse gas inventories and those types of things. So first of all, helping communities understand what resources are available to them, regardless of their size. Second of all, setting a path forward to look at how local budgets of small cities are as strained as large cities' budgets are. We just had a city just north of the Twin Cities eliminate their police department because of the budget strains. So if you can set forth paths that show them the efficiencies that can be created in retrofitting their their stormwater management facility or wastewater treatment rather. All of those things are it's the double bottom line of being good for the environment, but also saving cities money. And every community of any size in the United States of America should be focused in on those things.
I think clearly a lot of small cities you have, for example, one staff person is the planner, sustainability director, I don't know, solid waste coordinator. And I think that's really common in a lot of cities, and so that really poses a challenge. I think that lends itself to some of the themes that we've been talking about this integrated approach, is thinking about if you have fewer staff, it's really important, maybe even more important, that when you're designing a solution, it's creating these multiple benefits. It's saving you money. It's creating environmental benefits, and so on. The other thing is I think that take advantage of these networks. Kristen mentioned USDN, ICLEI. There's networks out there that help cities of all sizes gain access to the work that's happening throughout the U.S. and Canada and beyond. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Take advantage and just pick up on stuff that's already been done.
And I would also say, if you can, take advantage of your young people in your universities or your surrounding colleges. There's a lot of really smart people who may not have the title, but have the ability to support, especially through just capstone projects or other things like that.
All right, last question.
Okay, Rosalind Morrison from the Toronto Foundation, which is a community foundation. I'm just wondering if you can tell us what is and what could be the role of philanthropy in building a resilient city.
Well, I'll say that they can be incredibly important, because philanthropy can help cities maybe take initiatives and move forward on some things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Anytime a partner with resources comes to the city of St. Paul and says, we think you should be working on this, whether it's Trust for Public Lands or whether it is, the McKnight Foundation has been a tremendous partner for the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, helping us kind of promote the issue of impacts of climate change on the Mississippi River. So philanthropy, is never going to be the sole issue, because the amount of resources that philanthropy can put into it is relatively small compared to what governmental units can put into it. But if they can start pushing the sails, then the resources that cities have, counties and states have, can be directed in a more positive direction.
And I would say, please invest in the community groups themselves, those that are being asked to be at the table, there's asked to be community experts or under-resourced and invest in those communities.
I think that's a really good point. I think community foundations operate this really cool space because they can work so closely with the organizations within the community. So the way that we've worked with community foundations is it's often a partnership. A foundation will say, we will fund this initiative around equity or green job development between the city and this local solar provider and this local job training provider, and the foundation provides the glue between these existing leadership organizations within the community for the benefit of the community members, which is such a cool role to be able to play.
Okay, I'm going to have to, and I see there's someone standing at the woman standing there. She's got a passionate question, and we've got 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm
gentlemen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm Rob Graff. I manage the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, the metropolitan planning organization for the 5.5 million people of Greater Philadelphia. We have over 350 municipalities, only one of which is over 100,000 in population, Philadelphia. And I encourage, this is not really a question, it's a comment. I encourage folks to work with their metropolitan planning organizations and regional councils, because we can really serve to coordinate those smaller municipalities to bring the knowledge that they simply don't have the staff to attend things like the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We work closely with the City of Philadelphia to take their excellent work led by Mayor Kenny, and I see Sarah Wu is here, to bring that to the region as a whole. And I'm sort of disappointed that the Urban Sustainability Directors Network does not allow regional organizations to participate. So, thank you.
Right, thank you. So I would like to close out by asking each of you, what is the action? Laura challenged us all to deal in politics and to engage in action. what is it, as a government official, you would want us to help you with? What are the simple action steps we should be taking to advance climate adaptation?
The first action step I'm going to ask you all to take is spend money while you're here in St. Paul. We have incredible local craft brewers, so go out and get some beer. It makes conferences so much more fun.
No problem, we'll do that.
Thank you. If you need some tips, I'll be happy to provide those. But thank you all for being here first and foremost. I don't think that there's one single action step. It's a lot of everything that we've talked about. It's about embedding the work that we do and through every layer and strata of government is critically important. It is lifting up the voices of community, particularly low income and communities of color. It is about making sure that you are doing the simple steps first, because there's a lot of easy things that you can do that we continue to miss, and trying to identify those. But then at the end of the day, we have to be bold. We have to take risks, because this is no time to be timid. In the face of opposition from our president and the whole administration, if we're not going to stand up, have our voices be heard, and take risk, and be the resistance on this issue, no one else is going to do it. It's the people in this room. It's in people in cities across America.
I'm going to keep it short. I would say be innovative, empower people, be as creative as possible. We've got to push against the norms and really move forward, and really lift up the voices of those that have been ignored for a long time and continue to be ignored in the process. We have to empower communities and community leaders and community organizations as strong leaders in the adaptation and resilience world. And so use your positions to empower others, and remember that every story counts in this.
Beautiful. Thank you.
What they said, and I would also I would say one of the most important things for getting stuff done is coalition building, and whether it's cities working with scientists, or cities working with social justice organizations, or social justice organizations working with scientists, we're all trying to get stuff done, and getting stuff done is usually at the intersection of everyone's mutual benefit. So if you want the city to do something, then come to people like me and Kristen and the mayor and talk about what it is you want to get done, what you can bring to the table to help get it done, who are the other partners that can help get it done, and how the city can help. And I think that's often, when those types of coalitions are formed between government and people in the community, that's how stuff actually gets accomplished. It's not just one entity or one organization.
Fabulous. Well, let's thank our amazing panelists for coming to Denise's Den. And I've been dropping this thing the whole time and failed to actually use it. Oh, they took it off already. Anyway, I forgot to show your pictures. But anyway, thank you so much. A great conversation, and
Thank
keep
you.
up your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was a fantastic panel. And it kicked off the content portion of the National Adaptation Forum. Conveniently, Mayor Coleman mentioned Frogtown for me. As a reformed herpetologist, I am proud to say that actually Frogtown is one of the communities that is benefiting from the tree planting activity for the Trees for the Future. There are 1,000 people at the National Adaptation Forum. I am going to put forth a challenge to you that if every person donated $5, just $5, I'm fairly certain that's what a latte is in most major cities in America. Not that I don't want you to buy things while you're in St. Paul, but if you donate $5, we could give $5,000 to the community groups in St. Paul who are part of this tree planting effort. So you have 10 minutes to go and have a free cup of coffee to offset the $5 you're going to give for tree planting. And then at 11:10, the first set of sessions start, including the Minnesota track for the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership and for the National Adaptation Forum session. So go find a great session, and I'll see you later on today.